All right. Well, thank you all again for joining us on a Tuesday evening. Joined tonight with the Clean Air Baltimore Coalition, myself and Dante from the coalition are hosting and Rebuild Baltimore on the topic in the vein of zero waste for Baltimore. So let's go ahead and start. All right. Next. Cool. All right. So let's begin. And we'll start with a slideshow presented by myself and Dante on what's deconstruction within the zero waste hierarchy and its reuse benefits that spur the local economy. We're joined by Sarah Badiali, deconstruction expert out of Portland, Oregon, Clayton Shellhouse of Second Chance, and Jeff Carroll from Details Deconstruction, offering local perspectives on the reuse market, and by Councilwoman Odette Ramos, who is representing Baltimore City District 14. And then we'll wrap up this evening with a short Q&A and come to an end by the hour. All right, so what is deconstruction? And then comment in the chat if you attended our info session about incineration, recycling, and zero waste a couple weeks ago on the 3rd. And if you did join us last time, welcome back. And then you heard us speak about diverting as much waste as possible from the waste stream. So again, on the topic of zero waste, deconstruction is a component of zero waste that prioritizes salvaging these reusable materials and getting them into the local market, maximizing those materials recovered, and is more labor intensive, therefore creating more jobs in the local circular economy. So prioritizing zero waste and transitioning from burning and burying into the circular economy means less waste, less harm to the environment, and more clean local jobs and economic incentive for small business generation. So in this beautiful image, you can see on the far left the current linear system of take, make, waste, huge landfill, lots of waste. Recycling minimizes a little bit of that waste, but ultimately the holy grail over here of the circular stream is building up that local economy, maximizing benefits to people and planet, and the tiniest amount of waste going to the tiny little landfill for what cannot be recovered for reuse. So anyone here heard of the triple bottom line? So it's prioritizing more than just profits. It's people and the planet too. So the benefits of deconstruction is well documented. And according to the Delta Institute, deconstruction can offer several environmental, economic, and community benefits for communities with high vacancy rates and unemployment rates like Baltimore. And those benefits include what is listed on this slide. Economic benefits include more jobs, employs those that are hard to employ, resell of building materials, and sell of value-added products. Environmental benefits include reducing toxins from dust from demolishing or deconstruction sites, reduce heavy metal leaching into the soil, reduce waste to landfills, and overall reduce the consumption of virgin materials. Social benefits include the removal of blight, potential workforce development partnerships, potential for workforce training and contractor training, reclaimed materials to be used in restoration and preservation in historical structures. All right, and next, I give it to Dante.
All right, so we are burying so much money. A good chunk of this info comes from a great report from San Antonio, the nation's 7th largest city, Treasure in the Walls. What we'll do is we'll share that link in the chat before we're done tonight, as well as on Facebook. But in that analysis, they recognize that they're burying at least $1.4 million of material every year from demolition projects, as opposed to actually deconstruction and reusing that material. And with that being said, next slide, please. Baltimore produces at least 319,000 tons of construction and demolition waste annually. Think about just how much material that is and the fact that it's every year that we actually miss out on a lot of that material going into reuse, to rebuilding homes, to installations and institutions and things like that. So,
Sorry
no
about
worries,
that.
Steph. And actually being able to capitalize on the value that's already existing in a lot of the buildings that end up being demolished in the city. And we have 17,000 vacant buildings across Baltimore. So it makes far more sense to deconstruct than to demolish them when we know that kind of value is within them. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just think about all the things that are in a house. Like, we decided to kind of break it into like three main subcategories. You got your infrastructure, you got your structure, you got your details. So your AC units, your piping, all the metal work, the electrical equipment. You've got your columns and your concrete for your structure, and then you've got your appliances, your shrubs outside in your garden, the trees that may be on the site. All those different things go into making this property a more, I guess, productive, quote unquote, space. So when you just demolish it, you're missing out on so many of this equipment, so much of this equipment and material that could be utilized for future projects. And so there's just so much value in doing that moving forward. Next slide, please. So this one just shows the emerging market and an increasing market of reclaimed lumber across the country. As you can see, as we get closer to the present in 2021, this area is spiking. In fact, next slide, please. As you can see, the blue line represents the US economy, and the remaining bits are recycled lumber, recycled plastics, and recycled aggregate. Those are in fact going to grow at a much faster rate than the US economy over the next 10 years because of just the overall value of this material, rather than going cradle to grave as we have been doing for the majority of our society. Next slide.
All right. So further making the economic and social impact of the triple bottom line, as we know, there's way more jobs available in the reuse and manufacturing, and really is the holy grail of job creating, especially if we are prioritizing deconstruction. And there's even more jobs between warehouse and retail, not highlighted here, but as you can see, way more jobs in the reuse and manufacturing, and hiring more people, more small businesses hiring people, charging more money, marketing materials, and no one has even studied that yet. And a recent national survey of the deconstruction industry showed that the total labor income from deconstruction, both indirect and induced, is much more significant than demolitions. So while the average cost to demolish a 1,500 square foot home is about $11,000, whereas deconstruction is $18,000, demolition has a much weaker effect on the local economy. The total labor income associated with deconstruction as opposed to demolition is substantial and is nearly 4 times that of demolition. So while demolition is cheaper, it has a much weaker ripple on the local economy. Not included in these estimates are the recovery of costs through the sale of reclaimed materials and the indirect impact of more of the total budget going to labor and that subsequent impact on the local economy.
All right, so thank you for that, Steph. This just highlights what she was just talking about. As you can see from that same survey, the bulk of those demolition costs tend to be in that 15,000 and under range. It's a shorter project, fewer people are needed, and then you've got your deconstruction where it kind of spreads out a little bit. Now, again, even though typically more expensive to deconstruct versus demolish, your long-term impacts are so much stronger when you choose to go in that direction than a demolition project. So again, think of the fact that we have 17,000 vacants in the city right now. Some of them obviously could be reused and get refurbished, be used for housing that we desperately need in the city, affordable housing in particular, but also getting that material into different avenues that are not landfills and even incinerators. Next slide, please. All right, so even from a climate perspective, it makes far more sense that we deal with deconstruction versus demolition. So an average 1,500 square foot home is about 41 tons of embodied energy in it. And the best way to look at that is just all the energy that took to create that home, all the processing of materials, the shipping of the materials to one place to another. It's essentially equivalent of one vehicle driving 92,000 miles in a given year, or 81 vehicles driving a shorter, about 11,000 or so each year. It's the equivalent of 87 barrels of consumed oil. But if we decide to demolish that home, we now are starting the process over. So think, you got to get the lumber from the forest in, say, Washington or Oregon. That's got to be processed. That's carbon intensive. You got to ship it across the country. So that's carbon intensive. And you've got to build the buildings. That's carbon intensive. And so we just keep building out more and more CO2, when in actuality, we could shrink that amount of carbon that's emitted in the process of building new homes, new buildings. All right, so how far can lead dust travel? So there are three options here, as you can see. Now, dry demolition is you just taking a wrecking ball, just knocking that sucker down. And when you do that, you actually allow for things like lead and asbestos. We know that there's a lead paint issue still in the city, to get away from that site, and potentially could be breathed in by children, breathed in by adults with respiratory issues. Very problematic. You could also do the wet demolition option, which wets down the site. However, you may limit the amount of space that it goes, 300 feet or so radius, but now you're putting those toxics, such as lead, as asbestos and benzene, and things like that, into the soil, and which could then get into the groundwater as well. So that's problematic. But in 2004, there was the Baltimore Protocol that was developed, and anyone in the chat can let us know if they've seen this particular process actually happen, when they've seen a demolition of a building in the city, where you not only wet it down, you also cover it with plastic to try to minimize the distance in which some of this pollution can travel from within the former home. But again, you're using fresh water. You're now again missing out on the materials that you could have recovered in a deconstruction process, and that stuff can now get in the soil and the groundwater, contaminating any future project. Next slide. All right. So why did we call this webinar Rebuild Baltimore? Well, we're working on the Recovering Baltimore's Underutilized Inventory of Lots and Dwellings, the Rebuild Act. And so it's a very strong acronym, if I do say so myself. The essential idea is to make sure that we target homes and buildings that are that were built in 1970 and prior. The reason why 1970 is the particular year is that there are far more higher quality materials in a lot of the buildings that came at that year and before, as opposed to the last 40 some years. So or 50 some years. I know how math works. And so it's best for us to get that material as much as we can. So also, we would want to increase demolition fees. So even for those homes that would end up getting demolished, since they wouldn't be in this scope, we would make sure that the fees are far more pricey, so that way they can actually contribute to the administration of a deconstruction program, because we're going to need monitors. We're going to establish a deconstruction fund and a certification program, so that way folks can get maybe $5,000 to help with any deconstruction projects for a few years after the policy is introduced. Also, a salvage to accessory dwelling unit program. DC actually has one of those, providing various incentives for homeowners to be able to utilize reclaimed material for any sort of accessory dwelling units on their property, and setting a minimum requirement for recovered materials in new buildings. So for example, this policy would say, hey, starting out, 20% of what you put in this space should be reused, whether it's the sinks, whether it's the piping like we talked about, or the bricks. Use that in this new building, and every couple of years or so it would increase to the point where we get it to where 50% of new buildings in Baltimore would have to have some level of these or a minimal level of reused materials.
All right, thanks for that, Dante. And so we've created this image here, the deconstruction hierarchy. So similar to the zero waste hierarchy or the food waste hierarchy. So we are prioritizing the highest and best uses, as we see. And at the top, the most amount is giving it away on site, and then delivering materials to retail stores, making money, and then giving it to institutions to use, recycling, and whatever can't be used go into the landfill, that tiny amount. Also, I want to mention there's the online postings through Craigslist and through FreeCycle that could help divert waste from the waste stream in this hierarchy model. So thanks to Sarah, who will be presenting next with her website from the Reclamation Administration.com. She has listed out other cities and states that have deconstruction mandates. And it's also interesting to see that Google has a deconstruction ordinance for their 150 global properties. All right, I leave you this with our call to action. So get involved with the shaping of this bill. We need participant, we need stakeholders buy-in so we can introduce this bill in the fall. And as we focus on building Baltimore, we're always building our coalition. So join our Clean Air Baltimore coalitions. Next one's going to be on Monday, September 13th, 6:30 p.m. Information on that will come out soon. And then our next information session was hosted by Dante. We're really excited to talk about GRASS, the Glass Recovery and Sustainable Systems. It's a social innovation project, co-op, that Dante's been working on. I'm really excited to talk more about that, and tune in next time with that one on September 7th. I just made the event page on Facebook today. So you can go ahead and like and RSVP yes that you're going. If you want to reach out to,
subscribe.
yes. And if you want to get a hold of us, those are our emails. I'm Steph, that's Dante. And if you're not already following us on Facebook and Twitter, please do so. And I just created our Instagram page too. So it's the same handle, Clean Air Be More. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to yield the floor to Sarah.
Does Sarah have hosting ability so she can share her screen?
I can do that. Give me one sec. Oh man, there's a lot of people here. I have to scroll through. Find. Oh, I can find a participant. Yes. Okay. And I am making you a co-host, so now you can screen share if you need to.
All right, Sarah, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
All right. Bear with me. Let's see. You guys, that was a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate it.
super happy to be here. Thank you so much. And yeah, that was just impressive. So I can't wait to see that again. It's like, you know, when you're rich and famous and it's successful. It's way back when. So my name is Sarah Battiali. I am in Portland, Oregon. I've been in reuse, building material reuse specifically since 2005 in some capacity, but in Portland, I was on the Deconstruction Advisory Board to create our deconstruction ordinance here. So that was 5 long years of all kinds of things. And one of the things that we did with the ordinance was we legislated building deconstruction, and we didn't necessarily talk too much about what happened to the materials afterwards. So this presentation is about the possibility in the materials beyond reclaimed wooden tables, which is what we often see, and the rustic aesthetic. So this particular slide is just what I was talking to the city of Portland about what the next steps were. So we created our deconstruction ordinance, and we trained contractors, and we had workforce training, and we had materials. And what I wanted to show them was how to do that on the other side, which was to do workforce training in craftsmanship to make things out of those materials, and then entrepreneurship for people to sell those crafts, and production and industry. So production and manufacturing, really. So these are going to be a bunch of slides of materials that were turned into something and that came out of buildings. And the picture on the left is an artist in Portland who creates fine art out of building lath that comes out of those deconstructed buildings in Portland. And the guitar is from Detroit.
Sarah, have you shared yet?
Oh yeah, you can't see these?
No.
Oh, shoot, I'm so sorry. Crap. Yeah.
Would it be a Zoom meeting if we didn't have a small technical glitch? If you need help, let us know.
It was working before.
I mean, yeah, it should be. I guess if you share your window, that particular window, maybe it wasn't on that.
Yeah, no, shoot. This is gonna cut into my 13 minutes.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Can we help guide you through?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Did you start with selecting screen share at the bottom of Zoom? And then you can click whole screen or just a tab for your whole computer.
Somehow. Let's see. Can you hold on for just a second? For some reason,
Yeah, do you guys want to field some of the questions? There was actually a question
Yeah, do that. Thanks.
on
So
Facebook.
I could do it this way. I mean, it's in my email, and we could just kind of scroll through as Sarah talks about it. That just kind of speeds things up, I say.
Okay, that's fair too.
All right, great. So let's do that.
And you can tell she's on the West Coast. She saw sunlight.
Okay, Sarah. So this is where you were. All right, let's roll. Sarah.
I got my technical advisor in, so give me a second.
Oh, all right.
We can also shift to Clayton or Jeff.
Yeah, let's do that.
Cool.
While you figure that out, we'll go over to Clayton.
Yeah, cool. So Clayton, I'm gonna introduce you now from Second Chance. I'm sure those coming in from Baltimore, you're familiar with Second Chance, you visited Second Chance. And so yeah, take it away, Clay. Tell us, I'll give you the next 5 to 10 minutes. Tell us more about the local perspective on the reuse economy you've been doing.
Well, I think I would echo with Jeff and others that are on this Zoom that the platform is beneficial to all parties. You can speak to everything from material all the way through to human capital. We are blessed after 20 years of being in business as a nonprofit at Second Chance to having a very robust training program for associates who are returning citizens primarily. So we're giving those who have a desire and a willingness to be trained, to be educated, to do better than where they were before Second Chance, really to learn skill sets that are applicable not only to our organization and to this industry, but also to others as well, retail space, et cetera, et cetera. So deconstruction is really, it is the primary platform of how Second Chance derives revenue. We deconstruct homes from New England all the way down to Florida. And we're doing primarily single family. So they're not your typical row house within the city of Baltimore, but we're deconstructing homes. It could be anywhere from about 1,500 square feet up to over 14,000 square feet.
McMansions.
So the math for me personally doesn't work when somebody says I've got a home worth $8 million in Sag Harbor that I want to deconstruct to build something else. But what does work for us, obviously, is the fact that they reached out, they understand the green economy, they understand the triple D, and they want to be part of that. And so we're benefactors of having a brand that has awareness really across the Eastern Seaboard. But the model has to be that there is a pledge component. There's a financial commitment on the part of the donor to be able to help us to, I want to say, come out in a profitable manner in our model, as opposed to being subsidized from the federal government or local and state government. But at the end, and I'm going to cede to Jeff in just a minute, at the end, the model works. Deconstruction is just vitally important, regardless of what community you're in, regardless of the size of the home, regardless of whether it is currently occupied or vacant. But there are obviously different considerations that you have to take into account if you're going to deconstruct a series of row houses in Baltimore City versus a single family home in Sag Harbor that's on 3 acres. But at the end of the day, the recovery of that material, the ability to bring it into an environment where it can be sold, whether that be on site, as you mentioned earlier, or brought into a retail facility such as Second Chance. And then all the training aspects to be able to coach, counsel, train, educate our associates to be able to have a living wage and to be able to go forward in an economically viable manner is just, it's rich. I can't begin to speak how rewarding it is for myself and for others at Second Chance. And then, ultimately at the donor level as well.
Great. Clayton, thank you so much for sharing that local perspective with us. So, and you're not doing work you're doing work in Baltimore, but you're going up and down the East Coast. So you're traveling with the work that you're doing.
We are. And, if we talk about the benefit to an associate, returning citizens have never been on the Baltimore Beltway. They've never been across the Bay Bridge to go to the beaches to do deconstruction of homes there. They've never had a per diem. They've never stayed in a hotel or been responsible for meals. So there's such a broader training component to the deconstruction model than just learning how to take a home apart. And that gives life skills that, again, are just very, very beneficial, both for the associate and then for those of us who are on the training side.
Absolutely, that social benefit, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we appreciate that, Clayton. We'll move to Jeff, and then for now, Sarah, if you could stop your share, and then we'll have Jeff speak, and then we'll come back to you now that we've got your presentation up.
Glad you figured it out.
Yeah, so Jeff, go on ahead, introduce yourself, and continue the conversation.
I'm Jeff Carroll, and currently leading an organization called Urban Wood Economy, where we're working with cities across the country on how to build a supply chain for urban wood sourced from buildings that are coming down or from trees that fall in the city. Both are major wood waste streams that cities face. I can give you all the stats, but we'll just move on from there. The models that you're looking at tonight, and I'm glad that Clayton's here to talk about the Second Chance model, and then the model that I was a part of when I was part of Humanum, and we ran details deconstruction under a contract with the city of Baltimore. They're two very, very different approaches to deconstruction. Both, have a place in the larger scope of what we're talking about. But I would venture to say, Clayton, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that probably 99% of the stuff that you're doing is outside the city of Baltimore. And then 99% of what we did was inside the city of Baltimore. And primarily because in the model that Second Chance did, and I actually consulted the Second Chance for 3 years, was part of that team, and then replicated a lot of what they were doing in a similar enterprise approach. That approach is about taking houses down that have value still in them, good kitchens, good appliances, light fixtures, and there's just a lot of value to still extract out of those houses. In contrast, you come into the city of Baltimore, there is no potential for the donor or any kind of tax incentive. Those houses have no value in terms of accessories. The only thing they have left is structural value. And so what you're really looking for there is a hybrid approach to getting these houses down that allows you to, in a safe manner, extract as much of the value that is there and retain it and keep it out of the landfill. Fortunately, Baltimore has a very high quality brick that clads most of its row houses and buildings. And we, over the course of 6 years under contract with the city, were able to capture 1.5 million of those bricks through deconstruction and get them sold. When the contract ended with the city of Baltimore last March, and we finished out the work there, we closed up shop with 0 bricks left. Everything was sold. And so the same thing's true with the material, the wood material that we pulled out, about 600,000 board feet out of Baltimore roadhouses. Double that when you realize that once people had a distribution channel for that reclaimed wood, they brought that wood to us for us to sell, and we became sort of a brokerage for them. So I think those were things that were critical. The sale and distribution of reclaimed wood from Baltimore and surrounding area continues under brick and board. And the brick harvesting operation continues under Baltimore Recycling over there off of Edison Highway. And so those initial efforts to try to extract value from houses that are considered blight is still happening. It was a challenge. But the thing we loved about it, and as much as I agree wholeheartedly with what Clayton says about creating those experiences for workers, the travel, the staying in hotels. I drove a guy up to a project we were doing in New Jersey one time. We crossed the Delaware Memorial Bridge. And as we were about halfway over, he looked at me and he said, is this the biggest bridge in the world? And I said, no, it's a big one. I said, but it's not the biggest. And we had a conversation about that, but that just, again, emphasizes the limitations of the experiences these individuals have had. The flip side of that is that by creating jobs in the city and addressing these issues of blight and finding a way to merchandise that, we didn't provide those individuals with those same travel experiences who worked on that contract. But we did provide them with local work that was easy for them to participate in, and it kept the dollars that were being earned and spent during the course of the day in those communities where that work was happening. And so there was some, I think, additional economic benefit. I think there was some social fabric benefit to the neighborhoods where they could see houses being deconstructed, see the brick being palletized and the wood being captured, that encourage those neighborhoods enough so that people would call housing and community development and say, hey, we want the houses on our block deconstructed. We don't want them demolished. So I think there's an emotional, psychological impact. And we have a strong preservation community here too. There a lot of our architectural genealogy is wrapped up in those buildings. And when we can disassemble them, capture that brick, capture some of those unique architectural elements and the structure, and put it back into houses, especially here in Baltimore. I love the idea of an incentive that would encourage builders to utilize those materials that are local in their new construction. Although I will say that many of the local builders from here to the District of Columbia did that voluntarily. That we clad, I don't know how many buildings, were supplying brick pointers all over the city who were doing the historic preservation work, and then hundreds of thousands of bricks went to Washington, D.C. And I think there's these two models, is what Second Chance is doing in what I would call the high-end residential market, where prime real estate gets sold. And when it does, that house or improvement is going to come down. And there's a tremendous amount of material that could be returned back to the marketplace, and a tremendous number of jobs that can be created around that process if it's captured. And then the other is this more urban context that is less about, there is no, like I said, there is no tax incentive, there is no donation involved, it's strictly fee for service, but you've got to be able to capture some value from the material in order to make the overall business model work. But it can work, and I think ultimately it has a dramatic impact on diversion, on communities, on the individuals who participate. It's truly a triple bottom line. And we could go on and talk about the carbon capture that comes with all that structural lumber. And when we cross over and talk about trees someday, we'll talk about a lot more carbon capture there. But it's
yeah. No, I mean, that's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jeff. I'm glad you and Clayton went back to back there. Since we lost a couple minutes due to those technical issues, I'm going to pass this over back to Sarah for about 10 minutes, and then we'll get the councilwoman in to speak for maybe about 8 minutes. We may run over a couple minutes depending on questions availability, but ideally we're still going to get out of here no later than 8:35, just to let everybody know. Okay, Sarah, it's back to you. Feel free to share.
We're going to try this a second time around.
We believe in second chances.
Absolutely.
Can you see it yet?
Yes. I love the Ouroboros snake house.
Yeah, it's my snake eating its tail. Thank you. Actually, this is probably fortuitous because this is perfect to follow up Jeff's presentation. Okay, so 10 minutes now. This is the slide I wanted to show you about what I was trying to show to the city of Portland. On the one side, we did deconstruction and contractor training and workforce training. And then you have the materials. And what I was suggesting to them is that to create the industry, we need to do the same thing with the people who make things out of the materials. So both craftsmanship training and then also entrepreneurship. So this is that uncaptured amount of jobs that you get after you have the materials removed. And the slide on the picture up on the left corner is a woman in Portland who makes her living from selling art created out of lath, from lath and plaster in buildings. And the bottom picture is guitars from Detroit, Wallace Guitars in Detroit, that are made from their buildings that they deconstruct.
Cool.
So what do you make out of a building after you take it apart? In New Zealand, you make other buildings. So this is a very nice modern home made entirely out of materials that were salvaged. Or you can make jewelry. These two artists both make they're living from pieces, like the smallest pieces of buildings. So the artist on the left makes rings from that plaster. She doesn't paint them or anything like that. And the artist on probably the next one. Yeah. This artist makes jewelry out of pieces of wood. So a lot of times when people are talking about waste, they say, well, you can take some things out of a building, but other things are too small and we can't salvage those things. And these are examples of people who make a living from the smallest of the pieces. Another good example would be Original Grain, who took the seating from the Yankee Stadium and made custom watches and charged a lot of money for each one of those custom watches, and sold out almost immediately. I think it took them less than a week to sell out on their Yankee DNA custom watches. So if you continue to sort of bolster your creative class, they can really think about interesting ways to reuse materials, even the smallest pieces. The best use of materials is if you can get it into production and manufacturing, and these sunglasses are an excellent example of using technology like laser cutting to work with reclaimed materials to make something that you can produce like sunglasses en masse. Detroit Audio Lab also does this with their speakers. Each speaker is printed with what building it came from, but the speakers are very popular in Europe because all of their wiring schematics are European, and European markets really like reclaimed wood speakers. So Detroit Audio Lab is also really unique in that they teach people who have like compromises in their life, whether they're veterans returning from war and have PTSD, or people who were previously incarcerated. They teach them how to make products with reclaimed materials and buildings that came out of Detroit. So I noticed that Jeff had a guitar in the background. This is a guitar made from Jimi Hendrix's childhood home, built by a man named Reuben Forsland, who's a luthier. And he saw in the newspaper that Jimi Hendrix's home was being knocked down. So he drove to Seattle and got as much material as possible and started making guitars out of that. So when I mean not just wood, but also took the wiring out of the house and used those to make the frets and the fretboard. And this is a guitar named Carl, built from salvaged material in Metallica's first practice space. And so also mentioned was the psychological and emotional connection to materials. This would be a great example of that. Some things that you can make that are from the kitchen. These guys make all kinds of high-end knives, but I wanted to show from the reclaimed wood handles, but also like their smallest knife is over $300. And this is a artist in Portland who makes knives from both reclaimed wood and reclaimed rebar from construction sites. Then you can get into things like heat ducting furniture. You just have to think outside the box. And then we know what these guys are, lots of propane tanks. And there's an artist named Colin Seelig who takes those propane tanks and turns them into public benches. And if you go to the city of Napa in California, you'll see his benches everywhere. And I included the prices so you can see what kind of revenue you can actually generate from materials. Again, that's not just reclaimed wood tables or something that's rustic. A lot of these are very modern and very stylish. So speaking of that, going to fine art, this is an artist from Holland who makes photorealistic, large artistic displays from reclaimed wood. And all the wood that he uses, he doesn't paint. He strictly takes it from a place and uses it as is. So he matches the colors to his artwork. And so none of that wood is painted. And there's another artist who uses, wood from reclaimed buildings, lots of doors and things like that to make giant installations. So marketing, you can also use building deconstruction and reclaim materials for excellent marketing. So this box of Booker's bourbon, they decided to, again, use the DNA to help sales of this. After their warehouse, eventually fell down, they turned it into a marketing scheme. And Able Organics did the same thing. They have sort of like a triple thing going on. It's reclaimed materials for their marketing, but also they say that it protects the perfume better if you put it in a bottle that is dark. And there are multiple retail outlets, especially in Europe, of this combination of taking a mall and using it sort of like as a goodwill where people are dropping off materials. And they also have a design school within this mall, and everything in this mall that is sold is either recycled exactly how it came out, somebody donated it, or the design school made something more out of it, out of whatever they were given. And so it's a design school, but it can be for everything from like youth all the way to people who are doing their PhD and this kind of stuff. And that was everything. I just wanted to give you an example of outside the box. Thanks for your patience with me.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
That's beautiful.
So many things can be created. Fantastic. I mean, and I think that's one of the biggest things that we talk about when it comes to zero waste as we get ready to move to the Councilwoman Ramos. There is so much value in what we've already created, and yet we continue to miss out on it, whether it's municipal solid waste, whether it's C&D waste, as we're talking about here, any sort of markets that could be created in Baltimore, impacting multiple families, hundreds and thousands of families, creating these new businesses. So like beyond Jeff's work and Clayton's work and Sarah's work, like there are different markets for what we could actually create in the city, which would have long-term impacts far longer than any sort of demolishing of a building in a given neighborhood. So Councilwoman, if you are available, feel free to check in. We'll give you 8 minutes.
No, that's fine. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for your time this evening, and all of you who are on both the Facebook Live and the Zoom. Thanks for your interest in this topic. I come to this topic from two angles. One is my background in housing and community development. I'd like to make sure that when we're, dealing with vacant properties, or we're demolishing or deconstructing instead of demolishing, but also, the whole cycle that we talked about today is very much a community development strategy. So I'm very interested in it in that regard. I also come from the fact that the last city council and this city council is very committed to shutting down our incinerator. And so a lot of the waste that's coming from demolitions does go into the landfill, which the city just paid to actually expand, which is the wrong direction. But we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again, but also to shut down that incinerator within the 10 years that we have left in the contract. So this is one of the strategies. So sort of putting my two interests together, this makes a lot of sense. The other thing that's come up recently, it's been there forever, and I just put two and two together the other day, is that we have a severe illegal dumping problem. And so one of the reasons why we have an illegal dumping problem is because there's way too many people waiting to dump their stuff in the quarantine or in Northwest. And then instead of waiting, they're going to, go and dump their stuff somewhere else. So if we can have this program where we're also dealing with contractors, so that you're not just demolishing the home, but the stuff that you're doing in the home, that stuff also has to be recycled. That's going to be critical to ending that problem, also working on the incinerator issue, and then of course having a better environment and creating jobs. So we're coming at it from all of those angles. We actually do have an opportunity to start this process. My colleague, James Torrance, introduced legislation to have, when you get a permit for doing work at a property, that you have to document where you put the stuff and how much it was. And so we're going to be adding amendments to that to start that recycling process of where it should go and collecting the data. So at least, we have some place that we can start, and I'm grateful for my colleague to allow us to do that, and then work on the larger piece. But I think we're ready for that. We've certainly been ready for a long time to close the incinerator, but we also need innovative solutions to some of these problems that we've been having in our city for a very long time. So this deconstruction model, this thinking that we're doing around this is right up that alley of being more creative about how we approach illegal dumping, our environment, and jobs, and being creative. We're going to have to be creative to make this work. So I'm looking forward to all of you, to working with all of you to see this through. But I think there is a good possibility. And again, the momentum is there. It's a matter of putting the right package together, putting in the right incentives, and also some carrots and some sticks, and no pun intended, to make that work. So I learned a lot from this particular program today. So thank you for that. And I continue to learn, but I'm very excited to use this approach as another innovative way to help our city, and look forward to working with all of you on this. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. Again, my district, we have a lot of legal dumping in certain neighborhoods. We also have a lot of rehab going on in most of the district, which is wonderful. That means people are moving here, people are coming to Baltimore, and so we want to make sure that that waste is taken care of and not going into the incinerator or in my alley across the street. So I'm looking forward to continuing the work on this, and I'll leave it for questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Yeah, I just to that point, I mean, when we talk about waste and illegal dumping, obviously that's one of the things that comes up immediately, even faster than dealing with the incinerator, which we obviously want to shut down. But again, just continue to think about the markets and that we could create and facilitate in the city when it comes to reusing this material, when it comes to actually collecting this material, so that way there are places for it to go instead of having it to go to quarantine or to wait at the Northwest transfer station. And if there were more places for these haulers to say, hey, let's drop some concrete at this spot in Sandtown because they collect concrete, versus like, well, let's just drop everything we got from this house into one space where we can't actually maximize that. I mean, that would be huge. So there are just so many pieces that really would impact all of these communities in different ways, because we're focusing on zero waste, specifically environmental justice and economic justice, and then that intersection. We
Hey,
actually have
Dante.
about a good amount of time. You still get done in the hour.
I did
Yeah.
just want to say one thing really quickly. If you guys remember to tune into our next info session, Dante is going to be presenting all about what we do with glass, what we can do with glass, how we could reuse and recycle it with his program called Grass.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you for that plug, Josie.
Yeah. So
And then
if we have
Dante,
any
I
questions,
I have one. I only see one question in the chat from Andy, which may have been addressed in our slide. And then Josie, let me know if there's anything coming in.
Neil also has a hand raised, and if anybody else wants to throw up a hand, but did we answer that first question that was in the chat?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But it was about the CO2 emissions. We talked about it for demolition, but is it addressed with is there a comparison with deconstruction? I think.
Yeah, Jeff, I remember you kind of talking a little bit about climate impacts and trees and what have you. So I'm curious if you happen to know if there's any data. I have not come across it yet. I think it's a really excellent question to like review what reductions you would get from a reuse over a fully constructed new building.
I don't know. I couldn't give you those numbers. I know there's 18 million tons of wood waste coming out of cities across the country. And if we can start to effectively capture more of that material in durable goods, we're going to have a dramatic impact on CO2 emissions. Every pound of carbon releases 3.6 pounds of CO2. So the math gets pretty serious once you start counting up, millions of tons of wood waste. And so that's been my focus, but it's fixable. At least it is. We could flip the scale, because right now less than 3 million tons of that 18 million gets recycled.
Gotcha.
Awesome.
And then Neil, he's been patiently waiting.
Yes.
No, that's quite all right. I could wait longer. This is a great conversation.
We're ready for you.
Yeah, go for it, Neil.
Well, first of
Welcome.
all, thank you for this terrific presentation by all people concerned. I wanted to make a quick comment to emphasize what Jeff and Clayton pointed out about the human impacts. And I've been a fan of both of their organizations for quite some time. We did, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, where I work, did deconstruction contracting years ago. In fact, we helped HUD make deconstruction eligible for public housing. And we had some incredible human experiences. I'll just go to two. In Hartford, we created a company with tremendous help from the Laborers International Union, and our workers, only 8 of them became foremen, and 2 of them, one Latin woman and one African-American man, bought their houses because Hope 6, after you knock down a house, they were supposed to build individual houses, which helped people move up, and 2 of those folks did. Also, there was a long line to sign up with us, but we only had 10 slots to begin with. When we replicated in DC, we had a whole public housing unit. We had 58 people on staff with some great trainers who helped out with Second Chance. And here are two literal things that happened. We had, after weeding down some, not everybody says, we had about 45 men and women doing calisthenics every day before working to avoid injuries. And most of them were ex-offenders. And 2 police cars drove up. It was right on a big intersection in Anacostia. And the 4 police officers got out and put their sirens on. And as everyone paid attention, of course, they started applauding. They knew many of the people on site. And a guy by the name of Jackie Robinson, obviously not the Jackie Robinson, said to me, I never saw when a police siren goes off, 45 Black men don't run away. And then he proceeded to talk about the experience of learning deconstruction. And he said, I never knew you could sell something from the neighborhood that was legal. And finally, this was in a group discussion, he said, I no longer have to look for a job in a furtive way, in a feeling guilty or something, because I have a skill now and I could get a job. And in fact, I may start my own company. And I think these anecdotes point out what a profound impact deconstruction has had on these people's lives.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Neil. I want to make sure that we address the one question from Facebook, which was, can we just discuss the Rebuild Act a little bit more, since we're going to try and take action on this in the fall? Meaning, can you guys let the people know how they could be more involved with Clean Air Baltimore Coalition, and how, like, we need you guys to make this happen? So yes, let's talk about it more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you for that question, Facebook person. I would say that so we gave, like, I think 8 or 9 pieces of that bill, but like I've drafted something out that has about 26 different like components, just to kind of cover the idea of having like an app, so that way contractors know where the retail salvage spaces are, and who's a certified deconstruction contractor, how to put out for the city to put out bids to get an official teacher of that deconstruction certification program, the process of increasing those demolition fees, things like that. And so, in theory, if we were able to really like hone in, get all these different aspects of folks like Jeff and Clayton and Neil and everyone, and Sarah's been helping, crucial to help out on this as well, obviously. Then we would be able to construct a draft that we could help get to the councilwoman who's with us tonight, and has been very interested in lifting this up and being a leader on it, which is awesome. We really appreciate it. So if you want, and hopefully you do, to be able to reach out to us via email, obviously on Twitter, on Facebook, Clean Air Baltimore Coalition on Facebook, Clean Air Be More on Instagram and Twitter.
Get it
And
right.
just say, hey, you want to participate, because the more constituents and stakeholders in like helping shape what this bill ultimately looks like, the better. And then we could potentially maybe get it introduced before the year is out. Maybe early next year, and it really depends on the schedule. And obviously, Councilwoman Ramos would know better idea about that. But I do think it works alongside the Councilman Torrance's bill as well, and in terms of finding out where data is, because one of the biggest things we have as an issue is that we don't know where a lot of the waste is going from private haulers in this city. So until we actually start requiring that data collection, and then having all these different spaces around the city to take in this material, and like, so we have multiple second chance type entities, and get more folks like details back up and running in the city and what have you. Like, those are critical pieces. So even if you're not a contractor, what have you, if you want to get involved in this, just let us know, engage, and we're happy to have you help shape this bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it you? And if it's not you, that's someone you know. So, and we can wrap up right there. I would say,
hold on.
it's
I want to say
8:30.
one more
Hang on,
thing.
it's 8:30. It's been an hour, but I will say, if there's any last comments or questions that we can address before we end.
I want to make a second call to action, since Steph just said if it's not you, it's somebody you know. Like, maybe it would be super cool if everyone brings a friend to the next info session we do. Let's keep building these up.
Yeah, this is our
Absolutely.
biggest participation yet. So
Indeed. Yeah. So next time on the 7th, like they said, we chatting about glass recovery and sustainable systems Baltimore, GRASS Baltimore, which will be a small but hopefully mighty glass recovery co-op, and talk about the fact that glass is 100% recyclable, but we do not recover it like that right now. And we need more policies, more businesses that relate to this zero waste mindset to build it out. And so my hope is to lift up a few families with that organization. We'll talk more in detail that time. But yeah, so keep us in your mind.
yeah. And Josie is our excellent colleague. She's been putting in all those links in the chat. The link for the next event is in there, so you can go ahead and sign up before you go. So I want to just express all my gratitude. Wow, someone from Hawaii was here.
And from New York. We're just getting everybody.
And California. Aloha. Cool. Awesome. Super great. I'm super excited about tonight. Thank you, everyone that participated with words and showing up in the chat in any way. Thank you so much. Anything else?
I think that's it. Thanks
Thank you.
Sarah. Thanks to Jeff. Thanks to Clayton. Thanks to Councilwoman Ramos, of course. Thanks to Neil for that wonderful story of just like the impact, the human impact on deconstruction. And we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, folks.